The next section for TA southbounders is the town of Anau to the town of Riverton. It is 91.6 miles, and I put mileage may vary in there because we didn't stay in Anau proper. We were a little bit past that town, so if you decide to stay in that town, that'll fluctuate anywhere in the 5 to 8 mile range. Plus there's a couple alternates in place that I'll go over with later in this video. So if you camped where we camped the prior day, you start your morning instantly in a portion just called tussocks. And this is by far the slowest and most consistent form, portion, whatever it may be, of tussocks that you've experienced to date if you're a TA southbounder. There are very small forested track connector pieces between these tussock fields, and this is really the only portion for the first part of the day that you can hold a pace on. When you get into the tussock fields, it is very slow, very consistent, as you can see here. There are these orange posts that kind of guide your way, but many times you just have to stand in the middle of the tussocks and look for them. It is hard miles. The first 5-6 miles are very hard. I love this scene. It's just Magpie in a tussock field. Where's the post? You have no idea. So this will heavily impact your pace. When they say tussocks, they mean consistent tussocks. As you see, she was going the wrong direction and then saw an orange marker hidden to her right. I'm trying to point at it here. You barely can see it. Be very aware. This will heavily impact your pace. I kept this scene long because I wanted to show you sometimes the orange posts are like hip high and the tussocks can be like shoulder high. And again, they probably put them higher to begin with, and it's just the land kind of sinks over time and it just kind of sucks in those posts. But it's just humorous. We thought it was pretty humorous when we were doing it. The elevation, it's not that bad. You actually really appreciate when you're climbing out of the tussocks to this kind of forested track, and then it'll just drop you into a tussock field on the backside. So the elevation, really nothing to write home about. You can hold a good pace, actually better pace on the climbs and descents than when you're on the quote-unquote flats. That is also one of my favorite scenes when Magpie was showing how small that was. When you hit this sign, it kind of signifies the end of your tussocks. You get to the top of this kind of unnamed peak with a trig on top, and the track gets better and better and better. It does fluctuate later in the day, but ultimately the track will get better. This is the Araroa hut. There is a water tank here, full bunk hut, full service type thing. So if you are shooting for there, you can camp there. If you decide to go on, keep following those orange posts. This section, actually, the sign called for it to take far longer than it did. We were worried with the tussocks having slowed our pace earlier in the day that this would also be extremely slow. It's kind of that roller coaster stuff you're used to by this point. Sharp up, sharp downs, not really gaining thousands of feet of elevation, but pockets of 100 feet, 200 feet here and there. But the track quality itself is overall pretty good. Not a lot of mud, not a lot of tussocks, thankfully. There are those rocks and roots that every so often will slow your pace, but you can hold a pretty standard pace through this section, anywhere in the ballpark of 2 miles per hour to 3. If you're feeling really frisky, probably even a little bit higher. The quality of track's very good in here. And it's ultimately bringing you into the lower Wariki hut. Again, part of my pronunciation. And as you saw that time split, it's a little, they're averaging more than it actually does take you. You have to ford this river right before the hut. It was not deep at all for us. But again, river conditions can change. Please check those before you go into this section. This is the hut. I kept that piece of footage in there to show you the time split to the next camp spot. Standard hut, bunks, water available. So if you leave this hut, as you saw that time split said like 8 hours for 9 kilometers. Don't get worried. It is not that. It is drastically overestimated. I think it took us in the ballpark of 3 miles to get to Telford camp. You do have a very consistent climb. You are climbing a few thousand feet of elevation, but again, the climb is probably at that point one of the easier parts of your day if you did the tussocks in the morning. It's just straight up, but you're just climbing, good quality track, and you get to this tabletop land. And this tabletop land, again, really good quality track up here. You just kind of follow from orange post to orange post. No really big obstacles, no washouts. It's rocky, so your pace may go a little slower than you do anticipate. I would also recommend with water, every time you hit a water source at those huts in this day, fill up there. There are every so often some natural sources, but overall, those huts usually have a stream close by or a water tank that you can fill up. You do sharply descend to get into Telford camp, and this is where some logistics come into play. So when you camp at Telford campsite, 99% of TA hikers camp there if they're linking their miles up, because you have a broad portion of private land that you're about to cross. And I filmed this sign here. It is the Mount Linton Station. Broad expanse of private land. I think it ranges for 30 to 40 miles of the TA itself. So be very prepared to kind of coordinate your miles around that private land. There is a place in the middle of that private land. We didn't stay there. It is called Mount Linton, not Mount Linton Station, Birchwood Station. You do have to coordinate beforehand, but I'll talk about that as we get closer. So if you leave Telford Camp, you cross a river and you start climb up a kind of 2-track, pseudo single-track type stuff. Really gorgeous in the morning, as you see here. These hills were just really, really pretty. And as you climb towards the top, it is steep. Again, just get prepared for your pace. I won't say never. Just get prepared for your pace overall in New Zealand to sit in that 2 mile. If you hit 2 mile per hour per day, consider that lucky sometimes if you're not on road. So you get to the top and it's kind of this like rolling hill. I kept this scene super long. By far one of my favorite shots of the trail. It's just gorgeous. The sheep, the woods, the kind of just land itself is just epically gorgeous. So you start these rolling hills of this farm track, 2-track, pseudo single track type stuff. As you can see, it just kind of varies depending where you are. Eventually it will lead you into another river crossing. Again, check your conditions before going into it. It was not that deep for us, but it can be deep in certain situations. I think it got knee high as you see magpies crossing here. To get to that river also, I want to point out a few scenes ago, there's a very sharp junction. So just be aware on your maps because the 2-track continues straight, but it's a sharp junction off to the left to get to that river for southbounders. So more of that farm track, you're sharing a lot of this day with cattle. You're sharing a lot of their farmland. So be respectful of the cattle. Say hi. Maybe give them a nice word of encouragement, but be respectful. They're also being respectful to you when you walk through their cattle pasture. And this is why I say the water situation is not great. There are every so often a couple feeder streams in here, but it's all farmland. And personally, I don't want to drink creek water that's running through hundreds of cows. So it comes down to preference, comes down to opinion, also sheep. So Mount Linton Station, as I said, it puts you on this weird kind of track. Here's the sign. They really don't want TAA hikers crossing their land. I don't know why. It is their private property, so of course it's their prerogative. But again, this is not opinion based. I'm trying to give you facts. So it does this weird twist and turn. So since you can't cross their 2-track, you have to do this weird kind of like U-shape back around to get to ultimately where the trail will deposit you. And it does climb. The climb, again, it's on 2-track. It's pretty straightforward. There's not a whole lot of quote-unquote trail obstacles. It's just the trail itself is just kind of a weird wiggle-waggle this day. So it puts you up into the top of these hills and really beautiful scenery through here. Cannot recommend enough. Bringing water. Here's one of the creeks I mentioned. That was the best one we had seen. And again, it just runs straight through the farm pasture, straight through the cattle pasture. So it's up to you. Again, confusing junction coming up here. This day, just really be on top of your maps. I'm pointing to where the road is. We walked all the way down there and ran into another one of those Mount Linton private property signs. So I had to climb back uphill to where that orange marker was and take a hard junction off. So I'm going to just kind of broad stroke it here and say just stay on top of your maps pretty much consistently this day. There are a lot of confusing junctions. Once you think you're getting close to the road too, your maps may say 2 miles. You see me jogging here. It's longer. The GPX track doesn't exactly line up with the ground truth portion. There's a lot of weirder twists and turns that as of 2022-23 wasn't exactly on the GPX track. So there's those mystery miles in New Zealand for you. So budget time in there. I filmed this. There is an awesome spot called the Takatumi Tavern that if you call them, they will pick you up around the Birchwood Station area and drive you like 30 kilometers into their town or tavern to get food, rest, do what you need to do. They'll even stop at a Foursquare grocery store to help you out. Cannot recommend their service enough. Really support those folks any way you can. Awesome folks. So once you get out of there, we popped in, popped out, connected our steps. You had a little bit of that 2-track that will bring you into this type of track, and you're climbing that hill directly behind Magpie. And I say hill. It's steep. It's very, very steep. Again, the camera can't do justice to how steep it is, but expect to be crawling up this hill unless you're the top athlete of an ultra runner. Again, everybody has different preferences, different things here. So yeah, it's just going to be slow going up that hill. Once you do climb the top of that hill, you have a little bit of connector 2-track. Pretty easy, pretty flat, can hold a standard pace, start averaging out the slower stuff earlier in the day, and it deposits you into this forest. Again, this forest, in our opinion, had mystery miles. It seemed like sometimes I'm pointing at the sign, the ground truth signs didn't link up with the maps. We just kept following those orange markers, so it felt like it added on a little bit of mileage. But again, trails change, so I just wanted to point that out, that if you are expecting to get at a place at a certain time, that may hamper the pace a little bit. So you connect into a road, and this is why I also said mileage may vary. I'm filming this road here, Hewitt Road. The island bush track, which in normal circumstances is open, or is the quote-unquote official TA, was off to the right there. But when we passed through in 2022-23, it was being actively logged. So they have an alternate in place that adds on anywhere from 3 to 4 miles of the day. It kind of does this large U that gets close to the town of Otautau, as that sign showed. And Otautau, it's a popular spot for hikers to stay. They have a pretty cheap hotel there. So if your miles link up, you can go off alternate or off trail to get there. But if not, you can continue down the alternate, and it'll put you into Merriview Hut. Cannot say enough nice things about these folks, because without Merriview Hut, it would make camping in this section extremely difficult. Extremely difficult because of the private property, the town's off trail, so cannot say enough good things about them. They do ask for a COA, so please be respectful and be honest and leave them money if you do decide to stay there. So they also have a cool post-it board. We thought we'd leave a little quote. Next day, you're getting into the Longwood Forest. And the Longwood Forest for TA Southbounders is one of the last quote-unquote big obstacles of their TA thru hike. The Longwood Forest has a lot of reputation for deep pockets of mud, and it holds true to that reputation. But when you leave Merriview Hut, you have a little bit of connector 2-track for like 2-3 miles, which is pretty easy, gradually up, and you'll ultimately connect into the track itself that will bring you up to Bald Hill. So when you first get into the Longwood track, it actually is not that bad. It is steep. It's kind of that steepness you're used to on the New Zealand and TA. There are pockets of mud, but none of the pockets really get past shin high. There might be a micro pocket that got like right around that shin level, but overall, the mud is not bad. So you may be thinking to yourself, oh, I caught it in perfect conditions. I don't have to worry about the mud. Yeah, just check yourself. Here's one of the deeper pockets. I said it's not that bad. It's one pocket on the way up to Bald Hill, and that's really it. It's not bad. Again, conditions may change. So you get to Bald Hill and you kind of pat yourself on the back and are like, oh, okay, the Longwood Forest is not that bad. Again, get prepared for what the future may hold. Magpie here is pointing. You can actually see Bluff from here at the end point. So again, pat yourself on the back for the Longwood Forest, as well as like first seeing the end point. It's quite the feeling. So we took lunch up there. You have this connector 2-track that gradually goes downhill. Best water we saw, natural source, along this hike was in that connector 2-track into the next single track portion. So you get into the next single track portion, and this is where it gets the true flavor of the Longwood Forest. It is very consistently muddy. You keep thinking you're going to break out of the mud, but it's very rare that you have trails such as this that there's rocks and roots that's not mud. It's very rare. So you get to this first top, and it's kind of broad sweeping views. You kind of think to yourself, well, I'm not in the mud. It's going to be okay. There it is. It will get you. So I'm trying to give information here, so I'm going to stop talking about the mud, but I can't stress that point enough. It is very slow. So just don't expect to crush miles through here. Again, do what you want to do, but it is very slow. Water, pretty much non-existent, not a lot of natural sources. You can see stagnant pools on top of the mud, but I wouldn't personally drink that. I kept these scenes in here, a lot of them, just to show you what I was saying is like every step pretty much is just avoid the mud. It's a wonderful game to play. It's a different flavor than what you've been having days prior leading up to this, and like being the last obstacle of the TA South Island or the entire TA, it's fun. So there are 2 huts in this section, and I'll talk about those here shortly. I'm pointing at where Longwood Trig is, and Longwood Trig, this right here, signifies kind of the last quote-unquote muddy portion. You got through the majority of the mud in Longwood Forest. There are going to be still pockets on your descent, but the consistency and the depth of the mud is over. So pat yourself on the back for that as well. Once you hit that trig, the track becomes, as the closer you get to the car park, easier and easier and easier. Here we go. I said there will still be patches. You broke free of the consistency, not of the mud itself. So when you drop down the backside, you'll go into a place called Martin's Hut. I did not film it. This scene is the track directly after it. It's an older hut, limited camping, limited bunks. There is water available at that hut. So if you want to look more into that, you can. From Martin's Hut, you start this kind of track that hugs the hillside towards Turnbull Hut. And track quality keeps getting better. Like I said, you can start holding a pace. This is Turnbull Hut, older hut, rough around the edges. Camp there if you wish. You can look into that more if you want. There is no water at this hut. There are creeks before and after that you can access water. So after that hut, you do have one last big climb, and this is the top of the climb to just an unnamed kind of area. And once you start going downhill, you can really start holding a pace. It becomes a little confusing after that last climb out of Turnbull to get to the car park itself, because there's a lot of just like twists and turns and deep, dense forest. And so it becomes a little confusing. There's a lot of twists and turns, so just get prepared for that. And overall, the descent, though, graded pretty well. You hit the car park sign. This is to signify that you are done the Longwood Forest. The track, at this point, no more mud. Wash yourself off. There is a stream right before the car park that I'm assuming 99% of TA hikers wash themselves off at. Don't drink that water directly from where people put their feet in, but again, your preference. I kept this scene long because it shows bluff. Again, it's a great feeling, pat yourself on the back that you're getting there. So the next day, you can have a few options here. So there's a place called Colac Bay, a few miles from that area that people can camp at. There's a holiday park. It's 3 miles from the car park. So if you want to do a bigger day the day prior, or just do a smaller day this day, there's not a whole lot of amenities. There's a kind of tavern there. So you can do what you prefer. You do start with road, and the road, depending on the time you wake up, pretty gorgeous for the sunrise there. It is 2-track until it connects you into this, and then you have more busy road into Colac Bay proper. This road was surprisingly busy, so just be aware about that. Even during the morning hours, there was a lot of traffic, so just be aware. And this will deposit you into Colac Bay, as I've said, and it has that tavern/holiday park. If you want to stay there, it's right here. If you decide to push past, Riverton's pretty close. You connect back into a beach portion. And you've seen different beaches at this point in this series. This beach is slow going. It's mostly rock. It's not this type of rock that I'm pointing out right here. It's more so that small rock that you see here. There is pockets of sand that you can walk on like this, but overall, 80% of the beach line until you hit this next portion of track is rock. So you're going to be sinking in it. Again, we might have hit it at a weird tide. But if it's lower tide, it might be easier walking. So this is the type of rock I'm talking about. It's just your foot sinks directly into it. So even though it's flat, you might go slower than you do anticipate along this beach portion, just because of how deep that rock is and how loose that kind of rock/gravel is. You do connect into a pocket like half a mile of 2-track, which is nice, until you hit this to Hockey Beach Track. Epically gorgeous through here. It kind of is those micro ups and downs I've talked about on the North Island, specifically that you're going up a bluff, down a bluff, up a bluff, down a bluff, but really gorgeous, really well graded track, really well beat down track. You can tell a lot of hikers, locals, tourists, whatever, walk this portion, because for the farm pasture portions, it's actually really well marked and beaten down. So A+ for the track quality through there. And ultimately this track is going to lead you into one last ascent. And this is the start. You hit this gate and you're going to the hill behind it. It starts off a little brushy, but that brushiness lasts for 5-10 minutes, and then it becomes great quality tracks such as this. And it puts you onto this kind of peak-ish. You don't get peak out to get the views, but you can if you want. It's like 5 minutes off trail. If you continue on, you start this road walk into Riverton. Riverton's a smaller town. Don't expect a whole lot of amenities. They have a grocery store, a couple restaurants, and I say a handful of restaurants, because it's very contingent on the day or time. So you can resupply here, do what you need to do. Cannot recommend enough Whimsical Studio. It is on your map system. It is this woman that hosts hikers through Airbnb, through kind of a studio type feel outside of town. and it is just great for either couples, two people, because there's a single bed, but it is a great spot. Get ready for the last section.